Navy Matters.
Welcome back here on HMTV. I'm Richard Acritelli. I'm here with Dan Guida, an Army officer. He's also known as Lieutenant Dan. We just got done kind of speaking about many of his moments in South Vietnam. Now we're entering your final moments in South Vietnam itself before you come home. Are there any stories that you recall?
Well, I would have to say had to be the craziest day of my life. It had to be Christmas morning, 1967. Like I said before, I used to go out with just my platoon and some men, and we went out. We got into a firefight. We started trading shots with a bunch of Viet Cong. They started running. We started chasing after them. After a very short while, we got sucked into a minefield, and one of my armored personnel carriers hit a mine. I lost 3 men wounded and the track destroyed. I had to call in a medevac. I called in a medevac. The helicopter came in, picked up the wounded. Another helicopter came in to pick up the track that was damaged. And we were finished. We were moving on. About 5 minutes later, I get a call from headquarters to say to watch out. You got to remember, this was Christmas morning. To watch out for a helicopter coming in, call sign Reindeer. We go down the road a little bit. All of a sudden, we look up. There's this helicopter coming in, all decked out in Christmas lights, blasting Christmas music. I get the call, Alpha 16, pop smoke. This is Reindeer Alpha 16, pop smoke. We pop smoke. The helicopter lands. Santa gets out. So in the space of about 2 hours,
You lose an APC.
I lose it. I have 3 men wounded. Lose an APC. Do a medevac and get a visit from Santa. So you want to talk about a crazy day? I think that was.
Yeah, you don't forget that.
You don't forget that too much.
That's like a tough spot because it's the holidays. You kind of want to see the big guy in terms of Santa,
right?
But maybe not in that spot.
Not in that spot over there. Not coming in a helicopter, after a firefight and a landmine.
And there's certain things you don't forget.
You don't forget that. No, that's one of them. Yes.
Okay, so now you're in South Vietnam. You're in armor. You're in the headquarters. When do you finally leave the war in terms of when you come home?
I came home. I left the war. It was November, I think it was November 8th, 1968. I came home. I flew out of Vietnam. I flew directly over to Japan. Over to Japan. And then from Japan, we flew to Fort Lewis, Washington, which was the station where they were processing military out.
How long were you there for?
Yeah, I was in. What I did is when I came back to the States, I went to Fort Lewis, which is where I was. I was there for about 2 days, getting processed out and everything else.
And then that was it, right?
That was it. Yes.
And then you go back to.
I flew back to Kennedy Airport, which is to New York to Kennedy Airport.
Not far from where you live.
Not far. No, we lived right outside the airport, so it wasn't too bad. Let's see, Kennedy. Yeah, we flew back to Kennedy Airport. Yes, I'm trying to remember. It was crazy coming back. There wasn't too many. We flew in early in the morning, so there wasn't too much going on. If you went into New York City, that's where all of the demonstrations and everything
protesters.
Was.
Yeah.
Where I lived right near Kennedy Airport. Was a town called Inwood. The VFW and the American Legion were kind of like the biggest thing, so there really wasn't too much static or aggravation right in town. But so I really didn't have too much problem if I stayed in my town. But like I said, if you went into the city or something else like that, that was difficult.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, you're a young guy, you do your duty, you do the best you can in a tough situation.
And you finally get back to the state trying to put your life together, and there's all this garbage going on all over the place. A lot of the soldiers weren't involved with the politics. We were there, we were doing our job, serving our country and everything else. We weren't involved with the politics.
And you were drafted too.
I was drafted, yes, yeah. I was drafted. We weren't involved with the politics. And maybe there was some that were astute with the things going on, but we really didn't understand everything that was going on at that time. We were just happy to be home, to get back in, take the uniform off, and start a regular life.
Now, so many years later, you're big with the VFW.
Oh, I'm very big with the VFW.
And other groups in the Long Island State Veterans Home.
Yes.
That negative experience in terms of seeing the protests on the TV, maybe up close, it was definitely there for the next couple of years.
Oh, definitely. It was definitely there.
Does that drive you to ensure that these veterans today are properly taken care of?
Well, the Vietnam veterans really got the bad end of the stick. But what we've done is we've made sure that any veterans after Vietnam didn't have to go through the garbage that we went through. First of all, we got the VA to work better with them, to give them more information. When we left the service, we were given a piece of paper and sent home. Yeah. When the soldiers now leave the service, they're giving a training course, they're giving information how to do this and how to do everything else.
It's almost like a re-assimilation.
It's like, yeah. So our efforts, the Vietnam veterans' efforts, made it possible for these people to, first of all, they were never harassed. They didn't have to go through any of the garbage, but it gave them a lot more input as to how to reacclimate to the.
What was it up until like the late 70s or early 80s that Vietnam wasn't even considered a war in the eyes of the government or the VFW
when
or something?
You came back, we came back in 67, 68. The VFW didn't even want Vietnam veterans in the VFW. They considered it a police action, and they really didn't want them. So Vietnam veterans were not really too well accepted into any of these organizations. The American Legion was one thing, but the VFW especially, they didn't want Vietnam veterans. They didn't consider what we went through in a war.
Yeah, some police action with 59,000 dead.
58,235, not to be
along with
exact.
Prisoners of war that were never accounted for.
Yes. There's still, there's still 1,500 that are missing from Vietnam.
And that's a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where today you see it on the news. Veterans come home and you see the local VFW or American Legion is meeting them at the airport.
They're there to support them and everything else.
Or at their homes.
Yes, definitely. And plus there's a lot of programs that we started that help with the cancers from Agent Orange. I myself am a cancer survivor from Agent Orange. But there are a lot of programs that have been established to help these people adjust, get the best benefits that they're entitled to and everything.
That your generation had to fight for.
That we didn't get.
Yeah.
We didn't get. Vietnam veterans, the majority of Vietnam veterans did not get any benefits until maybe 2010 or 15.
Is Agent Orange a main, I don't know if killer is the main word, is that a main thing that
during 67
really hurts?
and 68, there are, Agent Orange was spread all over. Agent Orange was a defoliant to clear out the ground. And I know there were times where the helicopters spread the Agent Orange, and 2 minutes later, we were driving our tracks right through them. So what it is, it's a cancer causer. And there's a lot of veterans that are suffering from different types of cancer directly related to Agent Orange. I went through prostate cancer, and a lot of veterans are definitely hurt from that. It's something that takes a long time to develop. It doesn't always develop right away, but there's a lot of veterans that are suffering from it.
Here on Long Island, are there good services?
The VA, I got all my treatment. I went through radiation. I went through chemo. I was able to do it at the VA hospital in Northport.
In Northport.
I think the services there were excellent. I know I had to go for 45 radiation treatments. I'm still working with chemotherapy, periodic chemotherapy, but the VA hospital there is very good. Plus they have the one in New York City, and of course you have St. Albans. Now,
when you were there, did you see other Vietnam vets that were there too for the same type of treatment, or definitely. As you're walking in and out?
No, definitely. You go in the morning. There's 8 people in. There's 8 people in there for radiation treatments, and 7 out of the 8 were Agent Orange induced types of cancer, maybe prostate cancer, maybe other types of cancer. But there's 7 or 8 people there, and the majority of them all suffered from Agent Orange.
Now you come home from the war. This is 1968.
Yes.
Now, what do you end up doing? Do you go back to college?
I came home from the war. The first thing I did is I was able to go back to college under the GI Bill. The GI Bill was able to pay for
One of
my
the
entire
greatest
college.
pieces of legislation.
Definitely, definitely. I went to college. I became an accountant. I'm a CPA, and I'm just retiring right now. But the GI Bill paid for the entire college. When I was I went back to Nassau for the first year and a half to make up the credits I lost from St. John's, and it was great because the GI Bill was giving me something like $200 a month, and college was maybe $250 a year. Then when I went to Hofstra after that, it was about $800 a semester at that time, and the GI Bill was about covering everything.
Now, what type of CPA practice did you have? Was it?
I had a general practice, a small practitioner. I worked with some firms that were maybe 10 to 15 people, and the last 15 years I've been working basically. I had my own CPA firm with about 4 people, but the last, say, 10 years I've been pretty much just doing it on my own.
And do you help veterans out with their?
Definitely. I help them, any of the veterans at the VFW that I could help, and whatever I could do it, yes.
So now, ladies and gentlemen, we have Lieutenant Dan here, and that's a name that's very strong name towards Mr. Guida here, okay, in terms of Vietnam War, in terms of the film Forrest Gump, Lieutenant Dan, Gary Sinise, and he has his band, the Lieutenant Dan Band.
Lieutenant Dan Band, yes.
So we're going to kind of talk about something a little bit different, and we're going to kind of delve into maybe some films with Vietnam, with Lieutenant Dan, and maybe talk about a little of that history versus Hollywood. So the first one let's get into is Forrest Gump.
Forrest Gump. Well, Forrest Gump, you have Lieutenant Dan. I was actually interviewed for the movie. What happened is they had the character pretty much developed, and they went after 3 of us that were actual Lieutenant Dans in Vietnam to just get a little depth of character. So my contribution to the movie was the Tipperillo that he was smoking, because when I was in Vietnam, I used to
had
chew
it in the corner of his mouth.
I used to chew on Tipperillos when I was in Vietnam, so that was my contribution to the movies. If you're looking for accurate movies, in my opinion, the most accurate movie was We Were Soldiers with Mel Gibson.
Now, what makes that very accurate?
I think the way they portrayed the combat situations was close to, Hollywood's always going to be involved with it, but was very close. And it was really realistic. And one of the scenes over there where the radio operator called in an airstrike, and he called it in a little bit too close, brought me back to one of the battles I was in, Battles of Burlington Trail. This was Pineapple Forest, where I had the lead platoon, and I got the call to call in an airstrike. And I'm sitting there calling in an airstrike, and, there's a reputation of second lieutenants not being able to read a map, and I had to call in the airstrike. And I was happy that the enemy that was there was on a hillside, because that made it
a little bit easier.
Made it a lot easier to read. So that I related to that movie. But
a lot of pressure, though, to do something
definitely
like that.
A lot of pressure. You calling an A4 coming in that's going to drop napalm on people. You want to make sure you're dropping it in the right spot.
What about in We Were Soldiers? And this goes back to the VFW. We had Joe Cognatori here. He was the second episode, and the Air Cav just
the Air Cav, it was
brought
amazing.
them in all over.
Oh, it's amazing. You bringing 400 men in by helicopter, and it was amazing. There were like only 6 on a helicopter, but each time it came in, there was 40 or 50 men getting off the helicopters, and Joe was in that type of operation where, they just move people around very quickly.
Okay. Now, was there any other films that you thought did a good job with portraying Vietnam? Platoon?
Platoon was a pretty good movie. It gets a little bit dramatic at times and everything else, but I think it was a pretty good movie. If you're interested in watching stuff, I think on television right now there's a Tour of Duty is on.
Oh, that's from years ago.
That's
right?
from years ago.
Yeah.
The combat scenes are very accurate in there. The stuff about the town and the village and everything else is all Hollywood and everything, but that's a pretty good show. If you want to get an idea of something of what's going on in Vietnam, that Tour of Duty is a pretty good thing.
To get back to Forrest Gump, when Forrest says they finally turned off the rain. Remember, there was rain, driving rain that came up.
That's the way, when I was in Panama, that's the way the rain was. And all of a sudden, they turned off the rain over there, and right away, they got into a firefight. And that's when Lieutenant Dan got his legs shut off. But yeah, that's the way things were. It went from a terrible downpour, and 2 minutes later, the sun was out shining and everything else.
Now, what a lot of these films have in common is the jungle. When you were operating the armor, were you ever in parts where there was roads wide enough to get in there, or areas that you had to go to?
I was in Chulai, and I worked from Chulai out towards the water, towards the ocean. And a lot of the areas that I were flat land, so we weren't in the jungles. There were a couple of times where I went inland, and that's where we hit some jungles. But because the size of the vehicles and everything else, we really didn't. Some of the armored units did go plunging, jumping through the jungle and everything else. I didn't go into it that much.
Okay. Now, we talk about the Vietnam War. We talk about the films. A lot of these films came out in the 1980s and early 1990s. Did it open up almost like a new wound or anything like that, where it kind of brought this back into the limelight again?
You come back from Vietnam, the first thing you do is get rid of your uniform and take it all off because you want to forget about it. I know I worked for a company called Chrysler Military Sales. They put the salesmen in the PXs all over the world selling cars to servicemen. I worked there for 3 years, and my service was never mentioned for the whole 3 years. So you tried to forget.
Well, by you just didn't say a word?
The company, they knew it, but it was never mentioned. Wow. I never mentioned it. You really never wanted to get into a discussion. But these movies started coming out. They started to get, this is when the information about Vietnam, that we weren't baby killers and everything else, that type of situation, started to come out, and people started to get an idea that, okay, maybe the generals and everything are responsible, but for the poor slob that's just slugging along with a rifle, it was a rough time, and they deserved a little bit more consideration than they received.
Yeah, there wasn't much consideration.
There wasn't much consideration at all. I mean, like I said, you came home, you took your uniform away, took your uniform off, you put it away, and you didn't touch it.
Now, today, what are some of your responsibilities for VFW Post 6249?
Right now, I'm the quartermaster for the VFW. Being an accountant, I'm the bookkeeper and everything else, so I take care of the financial records. Our VFW Post 6249, excuse me, is one of the most active VFWs in the state.
Very productive.
We're very productive. We have a 5K run, and we also have a golf outing, which raises a great deal of money that we give to veterans and to veteran causes.
And the big thing is, it kind of keeps these things going so many years after the war on terror. And
yes, it does.
It goes by a little bit further in time, but there's still some of those concerns that are still there that need to be cared
people are
for.
still learning. I mean, what I do is I go to about 8 classes in our local high school and junior high, where the students are assigned a term paper on Vietnam, and they give them a couple of weeks to work on the paper, and I go in to have a discussion with them to answer their questions, because that's about the only thing that's ever there. I mean, nothing is ever mentioned about the Korean War.
Yeah.
The World War II, of course, you had a lot of your movies and everything, but...
What's the big high school? Is it Three Village, Ward Melville, that you guys go to?
I go to Ward Melville, and I go into Wading River.
Wading River
High School. Yeah, the high school in there. Those are the bigger ones that I attend. And it's nice to see where they at least teach about the Vietnam War. Otherwise, it's all going to be forgotten.
Yeah. And that's a concern, because the Vietnam War was over a very long period of time.
We're not going to get into a World War II. If we're going to get into any type of situation like you have in going on, it's going to be some type of a small operation, jungle warfare, or regional war. You're not going to get into a World War II or anything anymore, especially with all of the technology that's being developed and everything. Yeah,
and the understanding of the bomb and, so... All right, Dan, listen, thank you very much for coming down here today on HMTV. Lieutenant Dan Guida, he is, if you look at him here, he's one of the, main pillars of VFW Post 6249. He also does a lot with helping the veterans, PTSD.
And I'm at the home.
At the home, Long Island State Veterans Home. And, always extremely, extremely supportive. Dan, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Lieutenant
Thank
Dan,
you very much.
thank you for coming down here today.